Welcome to the EchoCast, episode 65. I am Bon Diesel. If you are new, this is a podcast mostly about the Division 2, and the community around it. And sometimes I'll talk about other stuff. If you are returning, thank you for coming back. I appreciate it. Today, I will have a State of the Game recap, Title Update 5 speculation, possible gear set changes, possible brand set changes, and I'm going to ask the question, what is the Division? But first, if you want to support the podcast or other projects, please check out patreon.com/theechocast and gain exclusive rewards and early access to the podcast and other content, asterisk, when I record it in time. I can't do it right now, but I'll try to get back to it ASAP. Special thanks to, gonna mess this up, but Pilodaro for being the newest patron. We're at 5. At 5 more, I'm gonna start recording short little updates just for the Patreon users. Okay, right into the State of the Game recap. So this week we had Thylander and Hamish, and they were talking about Title Update 4, bug fixes, and so on and so forth. Thylander confirmed that the patch that was coming on Thursday, which is the day I'm recording this, June 20th, would fix a few things that Title Update 4 missed or maybe messed up. The field research bugs for the new gunner specialization, specialist ammo issues, missing UI pictures for some guns, the medkit exploit that everyone's been upset about in PvP, and some remaining arm patch issues with the raid, apparently. Thylander confirmed that Title Update 5 is coming, but didn't elaborate despite Hamish's efforts, so I am going to speculate on my own during the gaming news, Division 2 news section after this. Thylander did go on about a bunch of the changes in Title Update 4, but I've covered them, mostly last week. But if you want to check out the VOD of the State of the Game or the podcast from last week, you can get a few more of those details. The specialized ammo had an issue where the client and the server had a disagreement, and it made the game think that you had full specialization ammo, so it would not let you pick up more. That was supposed to be fixed on the 20th, even though today I've seen some rumblings about it still being an issue with the Grenadier. But I haven't seen any confirmation of it. I haven't seen it for myself, so if there is an issue, I'm sure they'll fix it quickly. The medkit fix was actually interesting. There was an issue with the animation of being in cover and using a medkit that was screwing up the hitboxes and basically made it impossible for players to be damaged for a short time. And apparently this was being pretty heavily abused in the PvP side of things. The merciless change was talked about as being a correction and not a nerf. The game is definitely supposed to have fun exotic weapons, but not make them OP. He kind of gave a really good explanation of this, better than what I can honestly probably do. So I do highly suggest checking out the VOD. But basically, he was just going on about how if you have a gun that's the only gun worth using, you either have to beat it out, or you have to no other guns will ever be as good, so there's no point in using any of the rest of them. The Firefly skill has been updated pretty significantly, and Thylander was pretty big in the pushing people towards checking it out. I will say I've seen multiple little clips and videos and tons of people talking about how it really is way better, way more useful. So don't sit on the Firefly skill. There was a hint and some thought or some push that the skills may get a kind of rebalance entirely, and maybe the next title update, maybe after that. But they do want them to be, similarly useful as the DPS builds and tanks, especially now with the gunner. Some of the tank builds you're going to be able to make with that are pretty silly. and he hinted but didn't really give any specifics. They did also talk about the brand sets, and so as you may or may not know, the brand sets only come on certain pieces of gear. Some of them will come on things like knee pads and backpacks, but not on the gloves. And there was basically some light discussion about either getting rid of that system and having all the gear have all the brands, or about making it more clear which brands are on which parts. So it seems like there's at least some notice of that. So that was the majority of what they talked about. I do think the changes are good. I mean, obviously I'm always trying to have a pretty positive outlook on things that are going on. And I think some progress is better than none. While none of these patches have been the big major 1.4 that everyone wants and seems to be expecting, I think that it's a step in the right direction. So that's a good thing, and I'm happy with that. I do think that some of the changes, aren't obviously the answer to everything, but I am excited to see where they kind of go with Title Update 5 and so on. The Merciless change, I think, was a reasonable explanation, and while it doesn't excuse how maybe not very useful a lot of the exotics are, it does give a clear explanation to that change. But I do think people still have a point that it takes a broken gun to make something feel truly exotic and different. But I also think people are being a little convenient, maybe, about not maybe being super honest about just how very, very broken that gun was. And, that is what it is, I guess. I'm excited to hear that the skills may be getting a boost, but I will still argue, and I've said it before, that the skills can be viable right now. You can have fun with skill builds. I'm not going to say that they're meta. They're not the go-to choice in builds, but they're not as bad as I think people make them out to be. And I really hope, that I think if they're going to be even more powerful, then great. That means they're going to be pretty darn powerful, in my opinion. So. Okay, so moving on to the gaming news, Division 2 news area, some Title Update 5 speculation. I think a fairly easy thing to guess or speculate about is that Title Update 5 is going to be Episode 1 DLC. I highly suspect it's going to be what unlocks that. So right now we know that that's 2 new story missions at the zoo and at a presidential bunker, which I assume is basically Camp David. We also know that there's going to be a new game mode called Expeditions, and the first version, or the first showing of this game mode, is going to be at a college campus. It sounds like you're gonna have 3 parts of the level to fight through, and as you unlock them, you can go back and explore the ones you've already beaten, and when you get to the end, you get a big treasure room. If I was reading some stuff correctly, it sounds like each of these rooms won't be available at launch of the first expedition, that it's either going to be like a week by week thing or something like that. So the first week, the first room will be opened, and the next week, if you beat the first room, you get the second. I'm like 50-50 on that. It feels a little, if that's true, it feels a little artificially lengthening how long it takes to play this, but at the same time, we do know that there's going to be some leaderboards and some time trials, and there's going to be, I assume, some grade in the way that you beat these levels, and if you get the maximum grade on all of them, you get some special rewards. So I think that's I think that's cool. So I don't have a big issue with that necessarily. I just I just think they need to be maybe a little careful, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. For other things, for Title Update 5, I suspect that maybe we'll get some new gear, some new, on Title Update 4, we now have, we now have a new exotic gear piece, which is actually the holster. It's a pistol focused holster that you get through kind of like a little mini quest. I suspect we're gonna get some more exotic guns. I suspect we're gonna maybe get some more exotic gear. I'm kind of curious too if we're ever gonna get more brand sets. I have a feeling we won't. I suspect that we may just have what we have, at least for now. maybe, you know, in year 2 or something, we'd maybe get more gear. I also hope that all the new weapons we get aren't just exotics. While exotics are fine, we also know that they aren't always the most useful, and if anything, they often aren't. So I would be curious to just being able to get some new guns to get and have all the roles we want and to farm them and so on and so forth. I've said for a while I would love to see like a more tactical M4 model. That, you know, the P416 is, you know, it's kind of chunky, and I really don't like the model that much, even though I like the gun quite a bit. That really, there's multiple other guns like the MK16 and even like the Scar L and stuff like that, which I think are some of the coolest looking guns in the game. But unfortunately, kind of like the first game, they still aren't the best really to use. So, you know, with all those things, I really hope we get some more of those little side missions that you get with the season pass. Those first 2 are pretty neat, and I would like to see more of them. And I don't know. I guess I'm not creative enough to really think too much beyond that, but I am pretty willing to bet that Title Update 5 is going to be the Episode 1 release. And hopefully that's coming relatively soon. I believe my guess is going to be next month, and hopefully maybe sooner than later. Hopefully before this baby comes, so I can actually play it before I go through, you know, a month to 18 years of hell. So we'll have to wait and see. The other bit of news is, if you didn't catch it, Kotaku had an article with Yannick talking about overcoming the backlash. It seems like this backlash is a thing that's just in games now. I've noticed it with literally every single release, and even games like The Division that released to critical acclaim, and for the most part, a lot of excitement and approval from the fan base. You know, there were absolutely plenty of people who were pooping on the game before it even came out, but honestly, I think that they're getting what they asked for at this point. You know, they didn't want to like it, and that's fine. But you know, the game hasn't been perfect. The release isn't perfect. I can't think of a single game that has been. Maybe some single player games people have been more satisfied with, but even then, I can't really think of any single player games that have released to 100% approval. So Yannick talked a lot about how they learned a lot of lessons from the first game on how to do things and how not to do them. But he did acknowledge that, you know, there's a part of the player base, and it can be a very vocal part of the player base, even if it's relatively small, that will just grind through content they make for the game way faster than they can anticipate or that they intend. And at the end of the day, they won't be able to keep up with everyone. One thing that, even from just my personal experience, I think, you know, at this point everyone's, you know, finished the base game, but I still don't think a lot of maybe the more active community members realize how many of the more casual players, you know, haven't grinded this game for 250 hours already. I think people need to realize that, you know, most people who play this game might be at like 40 or 50 hours and won't be at, you know, absolute end game nothing left to do for a much longer. And while that doesn't help them, that maybe there has to be some realization of who the game was made for. But I'll talk about that in a while. He did talk about also how, you know, making new content for the game, fixing bugs, and balancing the game are all just completely different silos, and that they aren't connected. So it's not like they have people who are making new levels and then they take them off of that to go fix bugs. You know, it's different teams, and that also means that may mean they work at different paces and have different levels of complexity. So you have people who are making new content who I imagine are pushed relatively quickly to make new, interesting, cool stuff for us to do. Then you have the bug fixers who probably have the most priority, at least, you know, from in one outlook, who have to try to pump out fixes ASAP. But then you have the balancing people, which, you know, are essentially trying to complete an impossible task. I think we figured that out in the first game. It doesn't seem like everyone has figured that out, but, you know, because it seems that there's people who still think that their genius passenger seat developer ideas are gonna fix the game. If only they could be in there and be the ones making the choices. But I just don't think that's realistic, and I think that maybe people don't always recognize this. What I will say is there was a quote in here from Yannick where he said, "We don't want to end up in a world where we have to balance things differently between console and PC. that's not the route we've ever taken, and we don't want to take it. So I get it. So this was in relation to the talk about the raid, but I really don't think it's just about the raid. At least it shouldn't be. I've had conversations with people in the know, and there's basically this idea that if they would balance this game separately between PC and console, you would essentially have to develop two games side by side. And so when you make decisions for one, it's not going to be the same for the other. You're going to have to make maybe similar decisions, but in a different way when it comes to balancing and so on and so forth. The problem is that there need to be other solutions then, and not just we just don't want to do that. And I don't necessarily think that's what they're saying or what he said, but I just wonder how many of the devs are console players. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just think it's interesting that I'm willing to say that my guess is that there's a 50-50 split in the player base, between the two consoles and between PC players. Just from a logistics standpoint, I'll still hold to my guns that there have to be more console players, because it's just easier to get in at the $300-$400 price point than the $5,000-$1,500 price points. Maybe I'm wrong. I'll never know for sure, but I'm willing to say 50-50. But even then, it's just weird to me that when a game is, in my opinion, pretty clearly designed for the PC, either because it's the preference of the developer or it's easier because of the way the games are developed and so on and so forth. Like, I still think that the whole challenge I've seen some people throw out, that they would like to see a group of 8 devs do the raid on console. And while I'm sure they could do it, I don't think that there's anyone, I think that most people would say, yeah, this definitely doesn't seem like it was designed even a little bit with console players in mind. And when you think about how many of the players are on that platform, it's just weird. The resistance makes sense because I know what it would entail, but I still just don't think that's a good enough answer. Now, me thinking that doesn't change anything, and at the end of the day, honestly, doesn't really matter. But it's a weird, I mean, I have to say that I've always kind of felt like a little animosity towards the console players. I mean, the only person I've ever seen involved with the Division play the game on console is Ampercamper, the community manager in North Carolina. To the point of some animosity. Even Massive has the Ngon program, which is really, really cool and I find really interesting. But it's Massive that literally having a entire content creation channel and scope that is only focused on PC. So and that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. PC gaming is very popular and becoming more popular by the day, but it's a weird message, and I think I get it, but I just still kind of just tilt my head a little bit at it. But at the end of the day, at least they're saying how they feel. He did float the idea of further raids, the raids down the course, down the river, maybe not focusing so much on things that are so clearly pushed towards one platform, and how the gameplay in the next raid could be based on cover mechanics, or could be based on skill builds, or could be based on other things. He also did kind of wrap up, or towards the end of the article, also kind of talked about how they don't want to do matchmaking for the raid, which I still have my opinions on, but they do want some type of LFG type of system baked into the game, which I think is great. I think that's a good thing. So what's interesting is, because, and I think this kind of backs up the point a little bit I've made about maybe they aren't super knowledgeable on how the consoles work and the differences, is that at least on Xbox, there's a very sturdy LFG system built into Xbox Live. I don't know how well it's used. I've tried to mess with it a little bit without much success, but if they were aware of it, you would think they'd push it a little bit, or at least mention it to answer a lot of the criticisms. But that is what it is. It's fine. It's they aren't perfect. I think they do a great job, and I think the communication has been a lot better in this game than it was in the last one. It's just, the thing is that the communication, just because you don't like the communication or what it consists of, doesn't mean it's not good or better than the first game. So I do appreciate that in a significant way. And you want to know what else I appreciate? I appreciate a mid-roll. Okay, so jumping into a couple quick community topics and discussion before we do some content updates and wrap this baby up. So Thailander just today, Thursday when I'm recording this, proposed an idea, just threw it out there, which I thought was really, really cool. And he basically asked everyone and said, hey, what if we made the gear sets 4 pieces, but kept them basically the same, but knocked down all the bonuses down to only needing 4 pieces, which would allow you to use brand sets, a couple of brand set pieces with the gear sets. What would you guys like that? So what I've seen is in the responses, I believe there were a couple hundred at the time I looked, was basically a response of, that sounds like a move in the right direction, but we would like to test it on the PTS. Now that still comes to some of my qualms I have with the PTS. I think very, very few people use the PTS for testing. I think a lot more, at least a lot of the visible people, streamers use it as a way to get some quick views and show some people new stuff. There was a specific streamer who during the title update for PTS was literally complaining that they had to do the field research to show their viewers the gunner, and all they wanted to do was do that. And it was just like such a hilariously perfect example of how even some of the quote unquote big names in the game are just doing this stuff to make some money, but that's fine. But I think this is a cool idea. I will agree that testing it would be nice. But I mean, I think it's pretty clear right now that the gear sets just aren't really super desirable. I don't think they're entirely bad. I think the fact that 2 of them are locked behind the raid that most players haven't completed or probably won't. I'm not going to, at least at this point, unless I get a group to drag me along. After seeing the rewards and seeing now that how it's done, I don't care that much. And it's not because it's bad. I think it's a neat raid. I'm just kind of like, okay, I've seen what it does. I don't really have the time right now. I barely have the time to do the things I'm already doing. So, but I think the gear sets, even the ones that are kind of locked behind, I mean, they're neat, they're interesting. But I think that maybe, integrating some brand sets into it would be a big deal. I've seen some people float the idea that they should be able to roll talents on top of the talents they have baked into them. I think that kind of defeats the whole purpose of it, but I could be wrong. I'd be willing to explore it. But more than anything, I suggest you guys check this out. It's on my Twitter. I retweeted it at Bondiesel on Twitter, and respond to them. Something I said, I retweeted it out, and I said, hey, everyone complains about not being heard, about not having their opinions taken, and all this stuff. Well, here's a dev asking a very specific question. You can give a very specific answer. It doesn't get better than that from a gamer's point of view. You've got a guy who does control a lot of stuff saying, hey, here's an idea. What do you think? And you have a chance. And luckily, I'm actually pretty satisfied that most of the people haven't been, dropping stupid stuff on there. But I don't know, it's been a few hours. I'm sure that some of the clickbait, creators have already made capitalized, thumbnailed videos with their face looking angry or surprised, with everyone, begging everyone to check out their patreon.com/theechocast. And I think this is a great opportunity. So I think people should take it. And if they don't, then shh. Okay, and then the final thing I'm going to talk about here, besides the content updates, is just asking a question. I think this is something that kind of comes down to most of the disagreements within the community on this game. And what is the Division 2? So there's a few things we know it is. It is a shooter. It's a shooting game, right? It is third person. It's a third person game. But I think you could argue beyond that what people think it is. It seems like there's lots of different opinions. So I think the main one that I think is interesting and causes a lot of issues is I think a lot of people think that the Division as a brand is an MMO. So when you're thinking about MMOs, you're thinking about games like Warcraft and stuff like, WoW and stuff like that. So the Division isn't that. And what I find interesting about that is that what those games kind of imply is this nearly endless grind, this nearly endless gameplay, where you can put in literally thousands of hours and never finish. Not technically. And The Division isn't that, and I don't think it was even meant to be. I honestly don't. I think that The Division does have a little bit of like an identity crisis in a lot of ways, whether or not it's a RPG, MMO, whether or not it's a PvE game only, or if it's supposed to really be kind of a PvE, PvP, whether the game was just solely designed for the regular consumer or whether it was designed for just streamers, you know. And what I think is interesting is we see a lot of this in games now. We see a lot of games trying to find that identity. I would say a game like Red Dead Redemption 2 introduced a lot of these like very realistic mechanics, needing to bathe and shave and eat and, you know, all this stuff, to take care of your horse. And there comes a line of like, is this really fun? Like, does this make the game better? The Division has these things where, you know, we didn't add a lot of things. You know, there's no thirst mechanic in Division 2 or anything like that. I think a primo example, and I'm really sorry if I keep harping on this game, but Breakpoint to me is just the new Ghost Recon game is a game that just so clearly has no idea what it is anymore. In the original games were these, you know, you had levels, you went in, you beat the level, and you were done. With Wildlands, they tried to make it like an open world game with varying levels of success, I think is a nice way to put it. And now in Breakpoint, you know, when they first advertised the game, they're like, we're adding in this survival mechanics, and, you know, and this really kind of deep injury mechanic where if you get shot too many times, you hobble around until you can heal yourself and take medicine and whatever. And while they did that, which I'm fine with, I think that's cool, it seemed like they were moving towards a more gritty direction. They've also added RPG mechanics with bullet sponge enemies, guns and gear with levels on them, and with talents and like attributes on them. And so like talk about a game that has an identity crisis, right? Like what's interesting about a game like that, about Breakpoint, is it seems like Breakpoint is going to be a really bad RPG, like an almost like pointless RPG, where it could have just not had those things and just been a really cool shooting game with some survival mechanics. And instead they're like, no, let's go one step further. And while I don't think The Division is that bad off, I keep seeing comparisons between Breakpoint and The Division, which I think is kind of silly because I think from at least an RPG viewpoint, The Division is, you know, just way better. I mean, because it was designed from the ground up. It wasn't just, you know, it's kind of like Far Cry, the new Far Cry game, where they just kind of tacked on some RPG mechanics and level gating mechanics for some reason. It made no sense, but they did it just like they're doing with Breakpoint. You know, Division doesn't suffer from that, but it does suffer from a lot of other issues. I mentioned the PvP thing. You know, there's a relatively small but very vocal number of players who just really seem to expect Division in general, 1 and 2, to be their PvP game of choice. It seems like that's their only option, is that either it's a great PvP game or it's a terrible game. You know, and there's arguments about how, you know, PvP increases the life of the game, the longevity, that, you know, if your Twitch viewership is only 2,000 people at any given time, you're a failed game. And I think that's just a weird take. I've seen, you know, a lot of the commentary right now is that, you know, like the Division 1 PvP was better than Division 2. And what I think is interesting about that argument is that I don't really have an opinion on that. I don't think that's true, but that's just my opinion. But where I start to roll into a spot where I'm less feeling like it's my opinion and it's maybe more true, which is a scary thing to say, is I don't think if you know, obviously if you talk to people who like PvP in the Division 1, they'll say it was good PvP. But I think if you talk to the entire player base, or even if you expanded it out to just gamers in general and introduce them to what PvP is in the Division, I think most of them, especially ones who enjoy more accepted PvP games, things like Counter-Strike and, you know, Rainbow Six Siege and things like that, I think if you asked 100,000 gamers of all types about the Division 1 PvP, I'm pretty willing to put money on that. Most of them would be like, that's bad. Like, that's not good PvP. It might be kind of fun to cheese around with it and to do the things that you do to be good at it, but it's not the same as, and that's why there's so few people who do it. There seems to be this attitude that because, you know, that there's some like elite players that they're the only ones good at it, therefore it's good PvP, but you know, everyone else just sucks. And I don't think that's true. And so, you know, it comes down to this identity of what is the Division 2? Is it a PvE game? Is it a PvP game? Is it truly a mix of both? That, you know, there's a former ETF person, I believe he's Mike's Dumb Thoughts, posted, and he basically said the Division is a PvE game that you can choose to do some PvP if you want. But that all of the negativity around the PvP side of it and how it's just not what people wanted, it is kind of tough because it's just not really meant to satisfy that. And the reason I agree with that point is that the Dark Zone isn't meant to be this like, who's the best PvPer. And that's definitely what people think it is. And I would argue with the first game, that's how it was kind of sold. But I think if you really take a step back and look at what the DZ is it's a risky PvE zone. Where if someone decides they want to start to kill people, they can. But I think that there's this idea that the DZ even was designed to be a PvPer's paradise. And the fact that there's literally a rogue loop where you're discouraged from killing people seems to be kind of a push and like, hey, maybe that's not true. You know, and that's okay for you to feel if you think that's what it was, but maybe there's not as much evidence supporting your idea as you know, as you think or as you wish. And then kind of the final point, and this is something I kind of mentioned earlier, is I think that there's a weird thing about video games nowadays that like if there's not 100,000 people watching it on Twitch, then it was a bad game, right? And I think what's interesting about that is, at least from my personal taste, I don't really like to watch Division gameplay on Twitch very much. I like playing with other people. I don't mind streaming it, which is hypocritical, I understand. But anyone who watches my stream knows that my stream is very, very not about gameplay. It's often me stopping for 5 minutes and just talking about a subject that has been brought up in chat, or it may just be me knocking out and grinding some stuff while people chit chat with each other or don't say anything at all. But I don't think that these type of games really lend themselves to, you know, day to day, you know, to 100,000 viewers on Twitch. I know that Destiny 2 does pretty well, but I think it's kind of unique. It's been out a while. It's got content that is maybe a little more watchable. You know, the Division very well may have that one day. Especially the raids and stuff when they come out. You know, obviously those are exciting as people go for worlds first or just, you know, try some new challenging content. But the Division and other looter shooters, I feel like, are just very roller coastery, where when there's new stuff, it's fun to watch, and then it's not exciting anymore. Where, you know, you see games like Fortnite and the Battle Royale games especially, but even in League of Legends and other games that have always been so popular, they have a more steady base because they're kind of more adept. And so I think that there's this weird attitude with some people, especially larger streamers and even small streamers. You know, there were so many people who, you know, I won't name names, there's no point in it, but there were so many people who you can see they really thought the Division 2 was their money, it was their golden ticket, either to continue their, you know, medium-sized viewership. Like, people have to realize that the biggest streamers and content creators in the Division community are relatively small in the big picture, right? And then so the small creators in the game are minuscule, and I would consider myself in that boat. And there was a time where I thought that maybe I would get partnered on Twitch off of Division 2, and my podcast was going to be the most popular thing that ever happened, and you know, and that hasn't really happened. The podcast is doing well. When I manage to stream, it's fun and a good enough amount of people show up. I'm happy with it. Like when the Division 2 came out, I hit 2,000 listens on one of my podcasts. For me, that's ridiculous, because just a few weeks earlier, I was happy to have 100 or 150. But am I getting 2,000 today? I'm not. And that's okay. I get why. The excitement's died down a little bit. That's the way it goes. Now, I'm sure when the episode 1 comes out, or when year 2 comes out, or the new raid, if I'm more into it, you know, right now I'm hovering, you know, under 1,000 listens, and to me that's ridiculous. That's so many people listening to me ramble just like I am right now, and I really appreciate it. I think it's really, really cool. But but very quickly, and just in general, I've kind of pulled back on that whole idea that, I don't think there was a single developer, typing on their keyboard with in the back of their mind, man, I sure hope Bon Diesel can quit his job and become a full-time streamer. I sure hope that so-and-so, can get 1,000 viewers every day for 8 hours. I sure hope that this content I make lets someone play this game for 8 hours a day for 3 years in a row. And I don't think that, because that's not the game we got. And I think if they wanted to make that game, they would have. But I don't think that was ever the intent in this game. Was, I think they made it for 95% of the people who bought it, who are going to play it for 50 to 100 hours. The ones who really like it and are going to stick with it, and they're going to play for a few hundred hours, maybe even more. I played the first game for almost 5,000 hours, over 3 years, and I played a whole lot before I got married, so I'll point that out. But I think that people have gotten in this weird thing. I've seen a lot of commentation where it seems like people, if the game doesn't fit what they thought the game was going to be or what they want the game to be, therefore it's bad. And not everyone thinks that. I've seen lots of people who probably are more on my line of thought than not, but they sure aren't as loud. and I think, that should be fairly obvious to everyone. So what is the Division 2? I think the Division 2 is a light RPG that's PvE focused and lets people kill each other if they feel like it. And that can definitely be better. If they're going to focus on the PvE side, let's see a whole lot more PvE stuff though. Look at Warframe. It does it pretty well. And I think it's a game for normal people. I don't think this game is for streamers. I think you can stream this game. I think you can build a great community and find great people through this game. But I don't think that the average person is going to become Shroud off of the Division 2. And here's a weird thing to throw out there, and I would say this applies to me as well. Not becoming a partner on Twitch may have nothing to do with the game you're playing. Not everyone's a great streamer. I don't think I am. I'm not very attentive. I'm obviously not very consistent, which I'll talk about. But I think that Division, and just games in general now when they come out, get a weird rap because each game has millions of different people's expectations coming at it. And it seems like, there's a vocal minority of these people. When the game doesn't reach their exact expectation, it's a bad game. The Division 2 is not a bad game. The Division 2 should not be someone's worst experience they've ever had with a video game. It shouldn't be. It doesn't make sense. And if it was, that's a bummer, but I suspect there's more going on there than the Division 2. So there's my rant. I hope you appreciated it. With a quick content update, I've mentioned it a little bit. The stream is suffering right now. I'm busy on Tuesdays. I'm busy on Wednesdays. I'm training a new person at work starting this week, so I'm busy at work all day. There's a baby coming. I'm fixing up a room. I'm fixing up a house. I'm trying to keep up with this podcast, which I love doing. I'm doing my best. There's people who take breaks. There's people who burn out and hate what they're doing, or they try to get attention by quitting the game and then coming back. That's not what I'm doing, I promise. I'm literally just super busy, and I'll be back when I can. It may be tomorrow, but just be patient with me, and I really appreciate those who are. If your subs lapse on Twitch, it's fine. I'll try to earn them back. I really will, and maybe it'll be easier when the baby's here, as all the dads laugh who are listening to this. But we'll see. We'll get there. I'm not going anywhere as much as it would probably make a few people happy if I was gone. Too stubborn. It's not happening. I am still planning on doing the Bay Diesel stream. She's got 3 baby showers coming up, so we're gonna give her a 4th. We're gonna play some games. She's gonna, probably end up beating me in something. You guys are all gonna laugh at me. I'll put out something. I'm expecting that to be in the next couple weeks. I've got to figure out what she's willing to do, and that's about it for this week. So Again, if it's your first time here, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you're a long-time listener, 65 episodes in, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for checking this out. If you like the podcast, please follow on whatever platform you are using. If you're on iTunes, please rate the podcast and leave a review. If you check out the podcast on YouTube, please follow the channel, subscribe to it, like the video, comment down below with your questions or insights. I'd love to hear them. I'm on Twitch where I stream multiple times a week when I'm able, and I'm on Twitter, both as Von Diesel. You can find my Patreon page at patreon.com/theechocast. And that's all I have. So until next time.